Today, we've got a wild revenge story about someone who turns the tables and scams a scammer. We'll get into that in just a bit, but first, neighbor from heck gets evicted. About 20 years ago, I was living in a 2-story apartment building and had the neighbor from heck move in. Single mother with 2 teenage boys. I had a few incidents over the time she lived there that would fall between petty revenge, pro-revenge, and F around and find out. If people want, I can put some of those stories up. The final issue was noise complaints. After school let out for the summer, she started letting her kids stay up and they played music and TV way too loud, way too late into the night. And since I needed to get up early in the day, she was not a pleasant person to talk to. I reported her to the complex security for noise problems. And then I had a business trip come up that kept me out of town for over 3 weeks. When I got back, there is an eviction notice on my door for being non-responsive to noise complaints. So I gathered my papers from my expense forms and went to the business office to see what was going on. The agent I spoke with told me that numerous noise complaints were made about me and that I had responded to none of them. So I asked what the dates were since I had been out of town with documentation for most of the past month. We were going over this and the agent was getting suspicious about the complaints. Then the other agent's property manager got a call and told the agent I was working with that the guy in my apartment was doing it again. So I asked what I was doing and she said, "Your music is too loud." I told her I had nothing turned on in my place, so either she was getting a bad call or someone broke into my unit while I was in the office, and the agent I was working with told her that I had a hotel and restaurant receipt showing I was a few hundred miles away when all the other complaints had been made this month. The 3 of us went to my apartment and, surprise, no noise at all. So we went back to the office, they revoked the eviction, and gave the lady above me a 14-day eviction notice for filing false complaints on top of her other behaviors. Yeah, so there's nothing like accepting accountability and responsibility than projecting it on someone else, right? I mean, why would you lie and say that someone else is making noise when all you gotta do is turn your music down? Underweasel responded, "We moved into our first bought property shortly after we got married. We had pretty quiet neighbors by and large, except for downstairs and their feral kids, and we were rarely in as we were 20-somethings with full-time jobs and hectic social lives. My in-laws came to visit and took us out for dinner. We didn't get home till 10 p.m. and I went straight to bed as I had work in the morning. About 15 minutes later, the police came around with a noise complaint that they'd stood outside the door for a good few minutes before knocking. When husband said we'd been out and weren't long back, they agreed. Turned out, the crazy kids downstairs were at it and the noise had traveled through our empty, silent flat and ticked off the woman upstairs. I am Hikat replied, "We got a new neighbor under us at our last place who almost immediately started banging on her ceiling in the classic quiet down gesture when we were literally just moving around our apartment. At one point, she actually called the cops. Officer knocks and my boyfriend answers. Cop says this is a noise complaint and wants to know what we're doing. By that point, I'd walked up behind my boyfriend and told the officer that the floors and walls are thin enough that I could hear an upstairs neighbor calling for help just the previous week, which was checked out and proved to be true. And the only way we folks on this floor can guarantee zero noise from walking is to learn to levitate." He left shortly after to speak to the lady downstairs about how noise travels in a shared building. Officer came back to explain that apparently it was her first time living in an apartment and she hated it. Poor lamb. Also, hi, my name is Brendan, and if you guys enjoy these revenge videos, it would be so awesome if you left a like or a comment if you're listening to our podcast. That being said, our next story is, X thinks I was just using him, dumped everything I ever got from him and his family at his door. I'm leaving for a shelter, not because I don't have friends, but because I honestly want a break from humanity. I still have a job, where I made more than him, and daycare for kiddos. I'm currently packing and had a petty thought. I still have the table and chairs he let me borrow and some gifts from his mom and him. Mostly gifts because he didn't like my current shoes or outfit, so he bought me new ones to fit his aesthetic. It's a slight petty revenge, but I'm going to have my friend deliver everything to his apartment while he's at work. I'm not going near that place, and stack it neatly in front of his door. It's more of an aggravation to him as he would have to move everything to get inside, but also see that I was not using him in the slightest and he can have it all back. I also want no memories of him and am awaiting the day justice prevails and he gets charged. So again, small petty, but it's big for me. Update. I went to go drop off his stuff as stated and unfortunately he was home. I did not want to risk seeing him, dealing with him, or getting more traumatized by the situation, so I called a cop. She came to the scene, was one I talked to earlier this week, and I love her. She told me to place all his belongings in the grass. I did as told with my friend. She then told me and him to leave, so not only does he have to make a million trips downstairs solo for his stuff, but if he wants to throw it away, he has to walk like 6 blocks to the dumpster. So my inconvenience turned into an officer-controlled inconvenience, and I maintained zero contact. Yeah, this is a win on both fronts. I think some of the simpler acts of petty revenge are often the sweetest, and just knowing that he's going to have to make all those trips to and from to either throw his stuff out to the dumpster or get it upstairs, that's some chef's kiss stuff right there. Our next story is, she demanded I hurry up. Here's another story from my time working at a very popular theme park in Florida. When I worked at a resort one year, they had become short on cashiers. My managers noticed that I was fast at whatever tasks I was given, so they made the glorious decision to have me trained on cash register. Oh, joy! I wasn't happy, but had no choice. My coworker T was tasked with training me. T was a slightly older male who was very goofy, funny, and always inappropriately hit on me. My managers gave me a "I'm earning my ears" tag to put over my name tag, so guests would know I'm in training. And T and I headed to the dining area and my cashier training began. Like many resorts, this resort had multiple restaurants or bays to eat at, each serving different things. It also had a bakery/store. This made the register item list quite long, and it was divided over 5 pages. T said I would eventually memorize where everything was as I got better. Things were going well, and I was progressing nicely. Most guests were quite reasonable and understanding when they realized I was still learning. Some even gave words of encouragement, which I appreciated greatly, but then a thin woman with a pointy nose and a frown walked into my line. She had quite a few items, including food and non-food items I wasn't familiar with. The merchandise items, such as mugs and plastic, decorative cups, were in a different location from the food items, so T had to point them out to me. He then returned to the main page and had me do the steps by myself. The woman let out an exasperated breath. T and I turned to look at her. The woman says, "Can you hurry up?" And I'm like, "I apologize, I'm training." And then the woman says, "I don't care, I have other things to do." Well, my petty box was immediately turned to on as I grabbed her first item. I slowly scanned it. I grabbed the mug, turning it over ever so slowly to find the price. Like a paralyzed slug, I slowly found the proper merchandise page and rung up the item. The woman's face turned a brilliant shade of red, while T struggled to suppress his laughter. When possible, I kept eye contact with her as I took my sweet time, ringing each of her items up like a blind sloth. She was seething as I narrowed my gaze before giving her total. She angrily threw her card down at the counter. I picked it up, taking my time completing the transaction before tossing the card and receipt back on the counter. Yeah, I think it's kind of human nature when someone's rushing you and you're doing your best, you just instinctively take a deep breath and slow down and give them the exact opposite of what they want. So, is it petty? Yes. Did this Karen also deserve it? Yes, she did. NJ Devil 956 responded, "Back in the day, I worked at JCPenney during college. When people were using credit cards that didn't go through, we would have to call the credit company. Every once in a while, they would tell us to take the card and cut it in half. We had a huge pair of scissors in the cash drawer. Now, mind you, I mainly worked at Christmas, home from college, but nothing made me happier than cutting a Karen card in half. Meltdown would ensue and security would come. Good times, and 9 times out of 10, it was a Karen." Our next story is, Neighbours Petty Revenge 60 plus years in the making. A question in my city subreddit made me think of an ongoing petty revenge story. My grumpy backyard neighbor, who makes Clint Eastwood look positively jolly, has had a rabbit trap to protect his plants and garden. He catches them and drives them over at night, and releases them live at the acreage of his childhood bully. He's gotta be pushing 80 soon. He also hates his side neighbor's dog shutting in his yard, and I'm 99% sure he picks up the dog crap and puts it on the driveway where the tire marks are, since I every once in a while see dog crap pancakes when I'm out for a walk. Yeah, I guess you're never too old to hold a grudge, right? I mean, yeah, I guess some people say as you get older, you just start to care less and less, give fewer and fewer craps about what people say, think, and do, so this is actually pretty funny. Nothing like having dog crap pancakes in your yard, am I right? Tough Juggernaut 822 commented, Never mess with the old. They've had years to think up the ultimate revenge for everything. Our next story is entitled Jerk in the Parking Lot. This happened earlier today. It was short and sweet. Was in one of the more crowded malls in my city where people go to, especially on a Sunday with the fam and everything. The mall is attached to a nice 5-star hotel, apartment complex, ballroom, etc. You get the idea. Getting a parking spot is a bench, especially on Sundays, more so than Saturdays. So I'm done with my weekly lunch and shopping around with parents and got into the car. I literally just got half my body into the driver's seat before closing the door, and this jerk came up from the corner and flashed his lights on me to signal that he wants the dang spot. It's an underground parking lot, so him flashing made it even brighter than it'll be outside. I was bloody annoyed and mumbled to myself. Parents asked me, "What'd that guy do that you're annoyed?" "That danged old coot flashed me. He wants our spot." My mom said, "Oh, heck no, he ain't getting our spot. He can wait." So here starts the waiting game, where the old coot was about 5 meters away with his signal lights waiting for our spot while we're chilling in the car. Nail in the coffin was me exiting the car with my walk back towards the mall. Dude saw me and started turning his head for other spaces, went away within 15 seconds. Of course, I walked back to the car and got ready to move. Another car was immediately waiting for our spot, and this guy politely waited for our spot. No flashing, no nothing. Went away happily and shared a laugh with my parents. And there ends the family-sanctioned Sunday dose of petty revenge. You know, most people, I don't think, realize or care that, in the time that you spend waiting for someone to pack up their stuff and move out of a spot, you could probably find another spot somewhere else and walk to your destination at that point. So, if the car is, actively in reverse and backing out, that's one thing, but, trying to rush someone out of a spot, it's just poor etiquette. We can do better, guys. Come on. Our next story is, had enough of noisy neighbors, took it into my own hands. So I moved into my block of flats about 3 months ago. There's a group of young adults that are constantly sitting on the stairwell behind my bedroom, smoking, laughing loudly, and running about. One of them lives above me and plays loud music that they rap along to past hours constantly. I've tried reasoning and explaining I have a 2-year-old and I'm disabled. We deserve peace to no avail. I've called Noise Patrol, who they've just argued with and continued once they've left. Well, tonight I had enough. Tonight I'm home alone with my 2-year-old and I've spoken to them once already. So I chose Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses, the most rock song I could think of, one that my son is familiar with. Then I turned my TV up to 100, which I've never done before. It's pretty loud on 20 and has good bass for a lower-end model Samsung. I have misophonia, but I was so angry it didn't affect me. Then, just to add insult to injury, I started screaming the lyrics. I can't sing for love nor money. Once the song ended, I turned my TV off. One guy said, "What?" And they turned their music off and had been silent since. I said to my husband, if this continues, I will turn my sound system on and play Baby Shark on a loop. I am not playing games anymore. Best part is, the 2-year-old is still fast asleep. Ah yes, nothing like hearing the screeching sounds of Axl Rose screaming at the top of his lungs, "Welcome to the jungle!" At, midnight, 3 a.m., whatever time we're talking about here. That's gotta be pretty jarring. Probably worse than Baby Shark, I'd say. The Sleepless Jay replied, I had some students move into a house next door to me a few years ago. We went from super peaceful for years to endless nights of thudding beats pumped out by this little weedy wannabe DJ. I went round there loads of times to no avail. The final straw was them singing along at the top of their voices to some rubbish song at 5 a.m. I knew they'd be hanging the next day. So at 8 a.m., as soon as it was legal to start building work, I rigged up a hammer drill against a block of wood against their wall. Did this every morning after their late night beats. It took a few nights for them to get the point, and they stopped. Music off at 10 p.m. from there on out. Our next story is the drunk a-hole that got served. Way back in the late 80s, my husband and I drove from Omaha to Kansas City to see The Who at Arrowhead. I was about 8 months pregnant, and this was our last gateway before kid number 2 came around to keep us tethered for a while. When we got to our minivan, I know, after the show, there were about 6 to 8 college-age kids in the vacant spot next to ours. They were drinking beers and having a good time. They were also throwing their empty beer cans everywhere besides a trash can. Everywhere mostly seemed to be behind and on both sides of our car. This wasn't a big deal, but we had to back out and didn't want to have to run over about a dozen beer cans. As we're getting into the van, one of us said to them, "Hey, would you mind just moving the cans behind us so we can back out and go?" Out of nowhere, one of the guys in the group went to crazy town. His chest got all puffy and he started yelling at us like, "Who do you think you are telling us what to do, blah 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 blah." Now, years later, I don't remember what he said. I just remember we looked at each other with a "what the F is going on here?" My husband said, "Look, we just want to leave, so move the beer cans from under and behind our car." Crazy Town moved into a whole other realm of ballistic. He started slamming his palm against the van window, hard, demanding that we make him move those cans. To this day, I'm still amazed at the resilience of those Chrysler windows. His nuttiness provoked both of us, and we were both out of the van yelling at him to get away from our van. When it looked like a fight might break out between my husband and CT, I stepped in between. I didn't figure anyone was going to hit an 8-month pregnant woman. At this point, his buddies kind of pulled him back, but he was still mouthing off. We sneaked our way forward between a couple other cars and drove off with them throwing fists and yelling. A few rows over, we noticed a couple police cars. We looked at each other and said, "Yep." We drove over and recounted what had happened. The officer saw my belly and told us to take him to them. So we drove back over. Crazy Town saw us and immediately jumped toward our van, clearly ready to resume his tirade. We pulled over into a parking lot, and that's when he saw the police car. The first thing the cop said was, "You boys having some fun here tonight?" We hear a sound of, "Yes, sir," from the group. Then the cop asked, "Are you old enough to be drinking? Let's see some IDs." The group got quiet, real quiet. The cop says, "I didn't think so. So the first thing you're going to do is pour out every can that's here, open or unopened. And when that's done, we're going to talk about your disturbing the peace charges." We watched as the cop pulled a full case of beer from the trunk and the kids started pouring out the beer from the open case and the new case. Then we looked over at Crazy Town, waved out the window, and said with huge grins, "Have a good night. Bye." Still laughing 36 years later. Still laughing. So I just want to shout out the time period here. If this is happening in the 80s, things like this were probably a lot more common than they are today. Plus, let's be honest, drunk teenagers are just never a good time. I guess that kind of transcends eras. Vegetable Swan 2852 replied, "This reminds me of our neighbors who had daddy rent them an apartment next door. They were underage high school kids and were always peeing off the steps and being generally obnoxious. I obviously have no love for these kids as they partied way into the night every night. On this particular day, I was working at night. I was minding my own business and doing the dishes around noon while looking out the front window. Somehow, these delinquents had managed to get someone to buy them a keg. I called 911 and reported an underage keg party. I then just patiently waited at the window, with popcorn. It took them a while to get there, but because I was in the country, it was a sheriff and a trooper that showed up. The trooper parked directly behind the kid's car, blocking him in. Once the kids realized the cops were there, that dip crap got in his car and proceeded to back directly into the trooper's car. They were evicted after that. I still chuckle to this day, 31 years later. Our next story is, kept a scammer on the hook. So this is an interesting one. Small, petty, but satisfying. So about a year ago, I get a text message from a random number who claims to be the owner of the company I work for and says he's out of town at a conference and needs my help with something. I immediately think this is odd because 1, it's not his normal number, 2, I know he's in his office down the hall, and 3, he rarely ever texts and would just come by my office in person if he needed something. So I head over to his office and ask him if he knows anything about this. He clearly doesn't, so we know it's some scammer. He asked me to find out what they want. Lo and behold, they say they need me to go to the nearest grocery store and buy a bunch of Apple gift cards, take pictures, and send them to him. So I proceeded to spend the next 24 hours stringing this guy along, saying, "Okay, I'm on my way. Oh no, my car died. I'm gonna be delayed. Shoot, that car repair is going to use up all my money. Let me see if I can get a cash advance on my paycheck." On and on like this, and the scammer is still playing their game. Then I finally tell them I have the cash and I'm going to the store now. After about 15 minutes or so, I break the news to them. Since you're my boss, you know I'm a compulsive gambler, right? Well, unfortunately, I walked past the lottery ticket machine and spent all my cash on scratch tickets. I'm broke now, but I did win a free ticket, so I got that going for me. Maybe that one will be a winner and I can finally get you your Apple gift cards you so desperately need. I think they finally figured out I was messing with them and never heard back. One of the most satisfying 24 hours I've spent. You know, if you've got the patience and, the ability to do some quick thinking, I think messing with scammers is so satisfying because they're so easy to sniff out nowadays. Like, all of the red flags perk up immediately. So I think that there's a difference between like a telemarketer that's just doing their job and then someone that's actually trying to rip you off and ruin your life for their own personal gain. Those are the people that you should not feel bad for turning the tables on. SunnyGal001 responded, I once got a call from one of those scammers pretending to be from Microsoft. Guy was telling me all the things that were supposedly wrong with my computer. I work in the IT field, so I knew how to ask leading enough questions without giving too much away to string him along for about 45 minutes. Kept praising him for how wonderful Microsoft was, and he was for knowing so much about my computer without even needing to see it. I had his ego so inflated that he thought he had a huge fish on the line until I finally said, I still can't get over how awesome you guys are that Microsoft is able to tell you to call me and let me know my computer is full of errors, especially since it's a Mac. He hung up on me. Our next story is, threat of revenge was enough. I had a younger work colleague who thought it was fun to try and pick on the old guy at work. It got pretty tiresome after a while. His partner is a wee bit posh and the workmate is an engineer. This is important. I told him if he didn't pull his head in, I would put the stickiest chassis grease I could find under the door handle of his pickup when he least expected it. His response was, so what? I'll just wipe it off. To which I replied, no, not the driver's door, the passenger door. See how that goes when you have to explain to your missus why she has grease all over her manicured fingers. Problem solved immediately. And not a whole lot to say here, just the classic, hey, if you think I'm bluffing, go ahead and call my bluff, but do you really want to find out if I'm bluffing or not? Our next story is, won't fix the house? Fine. This is a seriously long story. Due to this, I've condensed it. 8 years of drama, and I just cannot type out everything that happened. If you're confused about a particular aspect, it may be that I've just glossed over it. 2017 to 2018. I moved into a rented house with 2 others. It was a panic rental. As we were harassed out of our previous property, there was barely anything available, and the ones that were available wouldn't take us since we had 2 cats. Well, the problem started almost immediately. The roof leaked, the bathroom wasn't properly ventilated, there was mold behind strategically placed furniture, we found bugs in the bedrooms, so I report them to the landlady because obviously that's not okay. She comes over, splashes some bleach over the mold patches, hoovers up the majority of bugs, and then promptly freaks off. Subsequent calls and texts to her go unanswered. 2018 to 2019. I'm getting sick of living in a crap house whilst working and studying full-time, so I start communicating with Rent Smart Wales, Shelter UK, and the local council. Environmental Health get involved and serve her a 3-page improvement notice that she legally has to comply with. There's crap in there that I didn't even know were a thing. Handrails, paving slabs, loose carpeting. Spoiler alert, she does not comply. So they send her another one and fine her, and she doesn't pay the fine and still does nothing. 2019 to 2020. I pay out of my own pocket to renovate the bathroom because every time anyone showers, it leaks into the dining room, and forward her the invoice. Ignored. One of us moves out into our own place. There's now just 2 of us, and since Environmental Health at the local council are all bark and no bite, I get back in touch with Rent Smart Wales. Turns out, this dozy cow isn't registered as a landlady. Whoops, this is an actual crime, as it's a legal requirement to be a landlady, you must be registered with an appropriate body. So they take her to court on my behalf for a rent stopping order. She doesn't even show up to court. It goes into effect November 2019. Edit. This happened in November 2020. Got my dates mixed up. By February 2020. Edit. 2021. Again, I apologize for the mistake. It becomes a permanent order. The court also fines her approximately £5,000 for court fees, etc. In order for her to be able to charge rent again, she needs to register as a landlady, pay all the outstanding fees and fines, and do everything on the improvement notice. She calls me, pleading poverty. I offer to buy the place at a discounted rate so she can get something out of it, and I can renovate properly. She tells me, I'll consider it. Right now I'm off to the Gran Canaria for 6 weeks. Poverty my fricking arsehole. This is the last time I hear her voice. 2020 to 2021. It's a panini. Everything is freaked. 2021 to 2022. February 2021. The boiler dies. No heating or hot water. I report it to the landlady. I report it to Environmental Health, who send out another improvement notice, and Rent Smart Wales are doing 3 monthly check-ins that I could answer in my sleep. No, nothing's been repaired. Yes, the situation is worse. No, I haven't heard from her. Throughout this year, I'm calling and calling and calling and calling and calling. She serves me in May of 2021 a notice of eviction that was improperly filled out, downloaded from rocketlawyer.com. I laughed my chest off because that piece of paper is as useful as a chocolate teapot. By September of that year, I'd been showering at work and friends' houses for months, and Environmental Health finally do something right. They managed to get her to agree to replace the boiler. It takes until November 2021, but it happens. Thank freak. 2022 to 2023. More improvement notices were sent out, and I was getting frustrated at the sheer lack of progress. I kept getting a caseworker in Environmental Health, which meant the process would have to start all over again. Inspections to document the deterioration. There are now 4 pots in the attic and 1 on the stairs, as every time it rains, it comes through the ceiling. Improvement notices, more fines. She ignored every single communication. The other person in my house leaves in July 2022, and it's just me fighting the good fight. Mostly on principle at this point, because freak this bench, but also because there's barely anywhere to go, and I still had cats. 2023 to 2024, I get another caseworker, and another improvement notice gets sent out. Nothing. Seriously? I'm furious and file a complaint. It gets upheld, and finally the tide starts to turn. Boyfriend moves in with me, October 2023, so that he can save up and eventually buy somewhere with me. 2024. Now, this is where, finally, things start going my way. July 2024, the ceiling in the dining room gives way. There's now a 2-foot by 2-foot hole underneath the bathroom. Environmental Health issues a prohibition order declaring the house is unfit for human habitation. And when I get the letter, I cackle like a swamp witch. Landlady has to fix the place within 4 weeks or be fined another £5,000. This order doesn't end my tenancy, and as long as I make good faith efforts to try and find somewhere suitable, she also can't make me leave, and neither can the council. And for every day someone resides in the house past the 4-week deadline, she's fined an additional £20 per day, which means that per month, she's being fined the same amount as my rent I haven't had to pay in nearly 5 years. Poetry. October 2024. Boyfriend and I find the most adorable project house. We put in an offer of purchase, seller accepts, and we start the buying process. January 2025. We finally complete on our house purchase, and last week we went to pick up the keys, but just as we're leaving the crappy house, I run into the postman. There was a very official-looking letter addressed to tenants-occupiers. Odd. I open it up. The mortgage company is taking the landlady to court. They're suing for repossession due to non-payment. The same day. The same day. The same freaking day. I'm getting the letter framed. Karma is a bench. It's been 8 years of jumping through hoops, but I finally have my revenge and my just desserts. Should have just fixed the problems at the start. It wouldn't have cost you approximately £20,000 in fines in one of your assets. Suck it, you weasel-faced sack of a badger spunk. FAQs. Why didn't you just leave? Multiple reasons, really. Firstly, inability to find anywhere else due to pancetta, lack of appropriate housing, and landlords not wanting cats. Secondly, the principle of the dang thing. You want to be a landlord? Great. That's a legal contract you're obliged to adhere to, so stick to it. Thirdly, because I knew the second I moved out she'd paint over the mold and spend £50 on some plasterboard that would stop the leaks just long enough to get some other unsuspecting family in, for an increased cost. So those FAQs at the end kind of answered basically every question that I had while reading this. Why did you stay? Well, you explained it. But also, this landlord, everything that she was doing initially, I'm just like, is this legal? Like, can you do this? And of course, turns out not. So way to fight the good fight, way to stick it out, persevere, and you win. Congrats. With that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Guys, if you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to drop a like or comment below. And if you want to check out any of our other videos, click the video on the right. With that being said, I will see you all next time.